Now that we've talked about the equitable interest, very important concept, let's talk about the concept of the four corners of a contract. What does that mean, the four corners? So it's a lot of lawyers speak, if you will. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a real estate broker, but the ideas of the four corners of the contract is anything written within the four corners of the pages of the contract, whether it's an as-is contract or any kind of real estate contract we're dealing with, the only thing we all care about is what's within that contract. So when we speak of the four corners of the contract, this means that you can't say, well, this is what I thought, or I intended to do this. Courts don't care about that. So when we're all doing real estate contracts, we kind of act like we're in front of a judge. What would a judge say? Well, the only way a judge is going to look at a contract if there's a dispute is to look at the contract. That's the concept of the four corners. So while we're talking about contracts and getting ready to make an offer, why escrow? What's so important about an escrow deposit? Well, from a buyer's agent perspective and a buyer, it gives you the rights of equitable interest. Now, how much escrow should you put down on a home? That's what the next video is about. So when it comes down to putting escrow down on a home, as a buyer, you want to put as little as possible. But you also want to put down as much as you can to entice the seller to pick you as a buyer. But not all deals go through. So in case it goes sideways, you don't want to put all your money into one contract. So what do I mean by that? Keep your escrow low. Don't put all your money in one deal. Well, because if you cancel a deal because you have the right to inspect, right to cancel, which we'll get into in a minute, if you have to cancel a deal, what if you encounter a seller that's not so inclined to like you or do business with you and they don't want to give you back your escrow? That's why you don't put down a lot of escrow. Let's keep going down this escrow situation we have here. So how much should you put down? Well, if I'm representing a seller, which I typically do, I want 3.5% of the contract price in escrow. I want two escrow deposits. I want an initial escrow deposit, and then I want a second escrow after inspections. So, as I said before, I'm shooting this video for you as a buyer, a home buyer, from the perspective of a seller, a listing agent, which is better for you. So, if I see a buyer with too little escrow, I'm going to ask them to increase it. But you don't want to just necessarily do everything a listing agent says, but at the same time, you want to try to get that home under contract. But just be careful. Try to keep that escrow to a number that's palatable for you, just in case there's a dispute. So what is the correct amount of escrow to put down? Well, for me, as a listing agent, which is what I primarily do, if I'm going to be selling a $500,000 home and you're a buyer making an offer on a $500,000 home, I would like an initial escrow deposit of at least $2,500, but I prefer $5,000. And I want a second escrow deposit of about $10,000, maybe $15,000, for about a total of $20,000. So let's continue the conversation about escrow deposit. So let's assume we're going to offer on a as-is FAR/BAR contract, which is what I'm going to talk about in a minute. So if you're offering as a buyer on a FAR/BAR as-is contract, your escrow is completely refundable as long as you're in your contingency periods, which are inspections and loan commitment or loan approval, which we'll get into next. Now, when we're talking about escrow, let's talk about the risk of a contract to a buyer. The biggest risk is breach. If you breach, meaning you're in breach, in other words, you're not living up to the four corners of the contract, you could potentially lose your escrow. So you always want to watch your timelines. What are your timelines? Well, first we have your escrow deposit. You got to make it to the escrow holder within the time frame stated in the contract. And then you have to make loan applications if you're getting a loan within the loan application period, typically 5 days. And then you have to inspect the home in a certain amount of time. That's a timeline. And you also have a loan approval deadline. Usually it's 30 days. As long as you're staying within those timelines, you should be okay to protect your escrow. I've done so many deals. I've done like 4,000 closed sell-side transactions. I've never seen one of my sellers hold escrow back unduly from returning it to a buyer. But you need to act a little cautiously just so you stay on solid ground and you don't get too far over your skis when you start, offering up money as escrow to sellers.